If you weren't told you were broken, would you ever feel the need to be saved? Christianity doesn't just offer a solution, it actually manufactures the problem first. Welcome back to Answers from Genesis. I'm Jen. I'm here with Alan Bondar, and today we're continuing our discussion on the last defense of Christian apologetics, the presuppositional argument. So last time we showed you how this approach skips the need for proof altogether by simply declaring that God exists. But here's the real question. What's the actual presupposition? Is it really about God, or is it about convincing you that you need God in the first place? At the heart of Christianity isn't the assumption that God is real. It's the assumption that you are a sinner. Without that belief, the entire faith falls apart. So today we're breaking down how presuppositional apologetics is less about proving God and more about proving that you need him, whether you like it or not. Ellen, this series that we're doing is loosely based upon your book. Remind us again very briefly about your book, please.
Called How to Kill God the Easy Way. You can find it on Amazon, and I hope you go and get it, because it's definitely deconstructing all of these things that we're discussing here, even in apologetics. So, yeah.
All right, and it's we're basing it on the structure of the book, but our conversations here are very different from the book, so you'll want to get both. All right, let's set this timer, 30 minutes. And Ellen, Christians say that without God, there would be no morality, no meaning for our life, no meaning in life, right? And no way to even reason. But doesn't that all hinge on the belief that people are inherently sinful in the first place?
Well, it's a good way of asking that. The presupposition that people are sinful certainly affects the need for God. But even without sin, even if we're not sinners, we still have the issue of evil in general to deal with in the world. So you still have to deal with morality, and I think that Christians are dead wrong when they argue ignorantly that atheists can't have morality without God. That's just foolish, because they're assuming God is some transcendent standard that we have to have. And the irony of it is that the only reason you argue as a Christian that God is your transcendent standard is because you have chosen him to be your transcendent standard. He only has that power, so to speak, if you grant it to him or to it or she or whatever you consider a God. So to have a transcendent standard, you still have to determine that you agree and are willing to abide by that transcendent standard's rules. So at the end of the day, you're still making the call. You're still deciding what you think is good morality or bad morality or whatever. It's no different than what the atheist does. We all decide what we think is a good standard to live by. So you're literally doing the same thing. The only reason you think it has to be God is because you've been duped into thinking you have this thing called sin that needs a resolution. And because you need a savior to deal with your sin, you have to have a God that solves that problem, and you offended God. And so here comes Jesus and the whole 9 yards. So it becomes a big web of, it's a mess. But yeah, so briefly to answer, without sin, you don't need God. You don't need a savior. Morality is determined exactly the same way.
Okay. So last week we started talking about presuppositional apologetics, and we found out that you and I have different ideas on what that actually means. And so remind me again, give us a real good definition. I'm not sure we actually got to that, but give us a real good definition on what is presuppositional apologetics.
Sure. Essentially, presuppositional apologetics argues from for lack of a better word, a presupposition. It assumes the existence of God because the argument is that the contrary is impossible. You can't exist without God. All reason goes out the window without God. You can't have morality without God. We can't even have this conversation because you don't have words without God. And so everything begins with God in order for us to be even to exist, live, have our being, have dialogue, because he's the objective transcendent standard, of course. And so presuppositionalism starts with God as the point in which we must agree in order to even converse. So coming into a conversation with a presuppositionalist, they are starting right out the gate saying, atheist, God exists. You're just suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. You're denying something you already know to be true, because clearly God must exist for anything to happen. That's just an assumption a presupposition we must have for anything to take place. And so that's the basic argument of presuppositionalism. It's called the impossibility of the contrary, essentially.
Okay. And so presupposition means that you presuppose, so you don't actually have to have any evidence for this. You don't have to have any logic. You don't have to have any reason, any critical thinking skills. You don't have to have anything to actually show that this God exists. It is something that you assume, and you use a different word, presuppose, as in we can skip the first step of building a foundation because that foundation is just assumed to be there. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the reason why it's presupposed. So the argument would go something like this: it has evidence because no other alternative can resolve the problem of sin. So right out the gate, the real presupposition isn't God. It's sin. Sin is the real presupposition. As long as you have sin, well, then you have no other solution to it except God, and not just any God. It literally would have to be Yahweh, because the Bible is the only of all religions that I've ever seen provides a solution to the sin problem, because sin, brings about death, and it's an offense to God. And so you suffer eternally or you die eternally or punished eternally unless you have a resolution to this problem. So if you have sin, then sure, yeah, okay, you can use the impossibility of the contrary argument, because there is no other solution. But that is where the hinge pin of presuppositionalism lies. They don't realize they're presupposing sin. They're presupposing it because they never considered the possibility that it's not really a thing. But once you eliminate sin and you realize sin doesn't exist, that's silly, I'm not offending some holy God, the whole foundation of presuppositionalism falls apart.
So there's really two presuppositions then.
Sure.
The first is that there is a God, and it's the Bible's God in Christianity, right? And then the second is that we all sin, and that's a problem, and that only the Bible's God can take care of this sin. So these two have to go together for presuppositional apologetics. Is that what you're saying?
And that's absolutely correct. And that's the reason why I remained a Christian instead of jumping to other religions, because I never, even in times where I would question, I wonder if God's real. You look up at the sky and you wonder sometimes, or even when I was a futurist, God hasn't come back. He probably, all the doubts or whatever. You think of yourself as John the Baptist, the doubter, and struggling, or a doubting Thomas, but you can still have faith as a mustard seed. That's all you need. And the one thing I never questioned was sin. It never even crossed my mind to think, is sin a thing? It just was. And because it was, with all my struggles and doubts as to whether or not God existed, my logic said he must, and the only solution to this problem of sin is Christ, and therefore Christianity. That was the only answer. That's why when people ask me, when you leave Christianity, why go straight to atheism? There's so many other options. Well, I've already eliminated all the other gods. I don't need to spend time there. I already know they don't solve the problem. So if there's no Yahweh, then there's no other God, and it's just the whole thing crumbles. So yes, sin and God are equal presuppositions in presuppositionalism. Yeah.
All right. So we pretty much looked at all the other arguments for God. But in this one, let's talk about sin. So is sin a legitimate presupposition?
No.
Why not?
Because sin is a concocted idea that only exists in a religious mindset. It only exists in the realm of theism, because sin is an offense against a holy God. Sin's an offense against the Creator that made you, or whatever. So that's why they go hand in hand. They, like, if you have sin, you're offending God, and you have God, then you have sin, and it's like you're back into circular reasoning again. If you can get out of that trap where you don't have God, then you don't have to really discuss sin, because I'm not offending some spiritual, eternal, infinite being called God that wants to absolutely destroy me for all eternity unless I repent and turn to his son, Jesus Christ. You know what I mean? Like, without God, you don't need sin. It's just not a thing. It's nonsensical to even discuss sin.
So many Christians will accuse all atheists, like a blanket accusation, that the only reason that we have become atheists is because we just want to sin as much as we want without there being any consequences or any repercussions. Is that what happens when you don't have sin as a presupposition?
Yeah, I heard so many times. Oh my goodness, and I still get it from people. The only reason, Alan, you left God is because you just want to live it up and live in sin. And it's just crazy, because so Jen, I'm just going to throw this at you, and I'm going to have the same testimony as you, I imagine. You know what I spend my time doing? Blogs, posts, writing books. Maybe against God, but still, it's not considered sin to write a book. I take walks with my partner and our kids and our dog. I go to work. I come home from work. I try to be the best partner I can. I try to be the best father figure to my partner's kids that I can. I don't know. I don't understand I don't even know what they're talking about. You know what I mean? Like, this idea of living it up, I like my life like this. I don't understand this concept. What have you done since you left Christianity? Are you suddenly out there eating babies and, whatever? I don't get it. What do you do with your time?
Well, I think I do pretty much the same thing that most normal, everyday people do. And where I think this comes from, Alan? So this obviously has come up over and over and over again in various conversations. And I have some Christian friends who have said, if I was not a Christian, I would rape every woman I saw. If I was not a Christian, I would steal. If I was not a Christian, I would murder the people I don't like. If I was not a Christian, I would go out there and I'd just be doing drugs all the time. They have this list of things that they would do if they were not a Christian. And so, I guess for those people, I'm glad they're still Christians, because I would hate for that real person to actually be my neighbor, right? But I never had those thoughts as a Christian, ever.
I'm here to tell you, they don't really have those thoughts either. Those are straw man arguments against atheism. That's all it is. It's an attempt to make you think, oh, well, if I'm an atheist, I guess I have no morals, and I'm just going to live on like some idiot that doesn't know what to do. Oh, I guess I'll kill someone today. Hey, what do I do with my life? I can't think straight without God. I have to do something wrong. Like, that's just not the way it works. It's absurd. Once again, you're determining your standard. You just chose it to be God. I'm choosing it to be other things. I don't need a God to determine a good standard of living. I am definitely a hedonist. I don't need to be a Christian hedonist. I'm just a hedonist. I always have been. Just before, God was my standard, and I lived for him because I thought he brought me the most joy. Now I live in a way that I still think brings me the most joy, and it looks quite a lot like I did as a Christian. It's not much different. Do you know what I would be doing, Jen? Now that I'm on this side, if I were a Christian and I truly was as passionate about Christianity as I am about helping free people from Christianity now, I would be out evangelizing. I would be doing posts nonstop, blog. I would be walking door to door, sharing the gospel with people. I would be telling people left and right about Jesus Christ. But you know how much I did that as a Christian? Pretty much from the pulpit. That was about it. But here I am as an atheist, because I'm passionate now, because I've discovered truth, and this makes sense. Before, something just wasn't all there, and I wanted it to be, and I loved God, and everything sounded great, and the theology was wonderful, but he just didn't exist. And so it was self-inflicted. I was trying to make him real. And so you can't be passionate about something you want to be real. But when you realize what is real, oh my goodness, it frees you to be passionate.
Very true. Very true. And there are many people who get mad at me for talking against Christianity, I should say, as much as I do. And at first, I wasn't going to. You know, when I first walked away from Christianity, I was literally just going to just shake the dust and walk away. And that was my thought and my idea. And the farther I got out, first of all, I realized I had more questions than answers. And so there was a whole lot more that I could study and learn. And now I get to study and learn all kinds of things outside of the Bible, which is great. But then I began to realize the freedom that I had, the life that I have, not to sin, but just I don't live under that guilt and that condemnation and that shame and that blame and that judgment. I don't live under that anymore like I did in Christianity. And always wondering, did I confess that last sin? If Jesus comes back right now, am I going to go to heaven or to hell, or am I going to be left behind because I forgot to confess that one sin? Just there's a million things. Every Christian has their different little beliefs, right? But I don't have that hanging over me anymore. And the freedom that you experience when being outside of Christianity is not something that you can explain to a Christian. I've tried. I have tried and tried and tried and tried. And most people who leave Christianity have said something very, very similar. It's something that you don't know it until you experience it. And so when I see people that are in what I call a religious prison, I want to set them free. I really, really, really do. I love Christians enough to want to set them free from the prison that they live in, that they don't even know that they're in. And so that's why I do what I do. And that's why I'm passionate about doing what I'm doing, because I think that they're in a greater prison than the imaginary hell that they believe in right now, that they think that they should tell people about, that they don't, most of them.
Yep. No, and I'm criticized also quite a bit for, always having to be out there with my ideas, and I get real passionate and excited about my ideas as I develop. And so it's like, I saw recent comments from a couple of my friends, I can't wait till Alan's Buddhist next, because I think that's the version I'll like of him the best. Like this joke, like I'm always a different person all the time. Reality is I've always been the same person. It's just I'm a person who constantly changes as he grows in his understanding of truth. Like I'm never content to just become status quo. And sadly, if you think that is a bad thing, you're the one that's trapped in some kind of a mold, which is very frustrating to me to hear when people say, oh, I can't believe you're always changing. I can't believe you're not. I don't know how you can possibly think you're a learner and still be stagnant in some view you held 25 years ago. That's ridiculous. So this is me. I'm the person who changes because I learn and things make more sense. And when they do, I get excited about it. And yeah, I want to share those ideas because I want to free people to learn something new. So yeah, you're always going to see this part of me. I don't see myself ever going back to any form of religion that includes deism or theism or any sort of those things. If I go to some religion like Buddhism, it's not going to include a God, that's for sure. Maybe I decide I want to go stare at my navel for a bit. Who knows? But I doubt that very much. But it may be the case. But you especially when you think of futurists, for example, and they're criticizing the fact that we are just out sinning and doing whatever, and we don't care about God. And I'm like, okay, so answer me this. Especially if you're a futurist, you believe Jesus is coming back any moment, and time is of the essence, and yet you're wasting your time at picnics and movies and binge watching TV shows. That makes no sense to me. It's completely illogical. Like, if you truly believe that and that Jesus is the only answer, why are you doing those things instead of the alternative, evangelizing, going passionate? At least I'm passionate. I love what I believe and I go for it.
So I don't like using the word change anymore because people have tried to portray me as, oh, I'm always changing my mind and I'm just jumping around from here and there. And what I have seen for myself when I look back at my journey through life is that I am growing. And so wherever I'm at and I study and I learn and I grow a little bit more, and then I study and learn, I grow more. And it's always been progressive in growth for me. And you have never seen me jump around like this. And that's not who I am, because when you are studying the way that you and I do, Alan, for the purpose of pursuing truth, of finding truth, well, then you're going to only just grow as a person, right? And so that's how I prefer to talk about it, is this is the growth journey that I've taken throughout life. And I am not jumping around, but the more that I learn, the more that I grow as a person. And I definitely agree with you that there are many, many, many Christians that you say they haven't changed anything in 25 years. I say they haven't changed anything since the household they were born in. For most people, if they were born into a Christian household, they still believe those same things that they grew up in. Now, there's going to be a few that have, made a few changes, like preterists, for example, but they've made one change. One. In their whole life, they've learned one new thing.
Right.
And I just think that that's a waste of life.
Oh, I agree, especially since what was that? The more you know. Dun, 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 dun. But yeah, I agree. I've never gone back to something I used to believe. My journey has always progressed forward in one direction. I don't bounce around, just whatever's popular. In fact, most of the time where I land is not popular. So it's not like I'm trying to fit in or anything. And I'm also not, it's never been my desire to be the outcast, because, there's not really much money to be made in that, so clearly that wasn't my goal. I just literally pursue it where it goes, and where it leads, it leads. You say the word grow and growth. That's a good term, and I like that. It's one of those cringeworthy words for me, unfortunately, because it has such a connection to the Christian mold that I always used to talk. The growth was one of the catchphrases or catchwords you use as a Christian. Are you growing in the Lord? So I hear it now, and it's just like, it's like licking a lemon. I have such a hard time using that word, but it is a good word, and it's not something I should cringe at, but I just do, because it just held me Christianity trapped me for way too long, and it's hard to shake that one.
Yep. And we do all have these triggers when we leave Christianity, especially. So many of the people who listen to us, they are either in the middle of going through this deconstruction journey, or they have already gone through it. And so it is very common to have certain religious terms as triggers. And so there are many, many religious terms that I just avoid altogether. I don't know that they trigger me so much anymore as I'm just trying to live my life without religious terms. And so I guess maybe I never looked at the word growth as maybe related to Christianity. So that one's not a trigger for me, but there are certainly many, many others, and everybody has their own. And I would just say about triggers that the first couple of times you hear it or you use it, it's going to trigger you back to where you were. But if you keep saying these words with a new intent, a new meaning, a new direction, it will take on that new meaning for you. And it's just a matter of just getting over it.
And you're right. And frankly, it's quite sad that that the cult's mindset can have so much power over us that it steals vocabulary that we could otherwise use. It's frustrating. It really.
I am still adamantly opposed to using what I call church words, and someday I'm going to do my whole series on church words that I have talked about before. So those are words that you would only find in a church. Some of them we're actually using today, presuppositional apologetics. I would not use that in any other form other than something about Christianity, right? So anyway, let's go back to sin. So we've got this dual presupposition. So God exists, we just assume that, and sin exists, we just assume that. So now how is this, what is it that comes together to make all of this so important that it is a whole apologetics thing? What's the whole thing here?
Well, I think like Cornelius Van Til, who's kind of known as the father of presuppositionalism, he recognized, as do all precepts, that none of the other apologetic arguments work. They're insufficient. They don't actually prove God exists. They take you to, again, I've used this analogy before, on a football field. The goal is to get to the end zone. They take you to the 50-yard line and say, look, I've gotten you this far. The rest is faith. And that's absurd, because if you're going to start with empirical data or empirical evidence, you got to finish the whole way. You can't just say faith takes you the rest, because you might as well just told me that at the 0-yard line. That doesn't help me. And I think presuppositionalists recognize that and say, yeah. And I've seen plenty of debates between Christian apologists, arguing over their different views. And the presup always seemed to make the most sense to me and had the upper hand, because, number one, they would demonstrate, just like we do, that all the other methods are completely flawed. They don't do the job at all. So the presuppositionalist comes in and says, hey, if we're going to prove the existence of God, we can't do it by proving the existence of God. We do it by showing the impossibility of the contrary. You take the exact opposite approach, and you show that there's no other possible way that anything can exist except God, and so therefore you're left with God. So that's really the long and short of it all. It's another attempt to prove something you already believe to be true. It's not actually one of those pieces of evidence that come through and prove something like you would in a court of law. This would never work in a court of law. But it's one of those things, I already believe this to be true, so how can I make sure I'm convinced it's true and stay convinced it's true and manipulate other people into believing it's true? I know what I'll do. I'll say, hey, every other possibility is false. Therefore, God. Well, again, as I said earlier, that works if you presuppose a couple of things, sin and God. You take those two out of the equation and you really got nothing. And this argument cannot build a foundation for God. It simply builds it's like a house of cards, assuming a foundation that you already assume exists.
But why is it important? Why is this idea of sin important?
Why is it important to who? What's your question?
Christians.
Why is it important to Christians?
If we've gotten rid of all of the other arguments for God, why is the idea of sin itself important in proving God?
Well, first of all, it's not that sin is important in proving God. It's that the assumption, the presupposition is that sin does exist. There's no question about that in Christianity. God said it. The wages of sin is death. So if you have sin as a problem, then you need to have a solution. And so Christianity is the only one that provides that solution to the sin problem. So you're already in this mode of, I'm a sinner, I need a savior. Christian God. This is a good mix. This works. This is the only thing that provides a solution. So in 1 Peter 3, Peter talks about always being ready to give a defense of the hope that is within you, like to speak away any other arguments. That's the Greek word there. It means to speak away. Apologia, to speak away. So the presupposition is, okay, so how do you speak away all the statements against Christianity? Well, we know God exists because it's the only solution to the sin problem, because he gives Jesus Christ and all this. So how do you speak away the arguments against it and give hope, give a defense for your hope? You give the impossibility of the contrary. You say, well, look, you're a sinner, right? Have you ever disobeyed your parents? Have you ever stolen? Have you ever, blah, 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 and on and on. You give a list of sins. Oh, yeah, I've done this thing. Oh, you're a sinner. Oh, if you're a sinner, you need a solution. Let me tell you why God exists and provides the solution. All the other options are impossible. Come to Jesus. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why it's important. That's why the Christian apologist thinks that this argument's important.
Okay. All right. So now we're getting somewhere. So the reason that we need God, according to Christianity, is because there is this presupposition that we have actually sinned, or that we were born sinners, depending on.
Well, no. The reason we need the Christian God, the reason Yahweh is the only true God, is because of the sin problem. That's how the Christian apologist, that's a presuppositionalist,
Right.
defends Yahweh as the only true God because it's the only one that provides a solution to the sin problem. There are plenty of people that already presume or presuppose God exists. And that's just for all the reasons we've talked about up until now throughout this whole series and in the rest of my book. You already presuppose God exists. So if you get rid of God, it almost immediately, it's like you realize, oh, sin doesn't exist either, because they go hand in hand. Without God, you don't have this thing called sin, and sin is like, especially when it comes to like sins of the mind, all this and that, and I used to feel so guilty for all the things I would think. Oh my goodness, I just offended God by my thoughts.
And just like with any addiction that you need to quit, once the brainwashing has been removed, you just pick a time and you stop.
Indeed, you do. We'll pick this up next time, but please like and subscribe, share this, let your friends know we're here and we're talking about real life things. Drop a tip in the tip jar and we'll see you guys again next week.
All right, until next time, question your faith with answers from Genesis.